Good morning. It is very good to be with you, both those of us here in person and those watching online or on catch-up. My name's Rob. I'm part of the church family here at St Michael's. I'm married to Vicky. You've got double Wicks this morning. We're part of the way into a series entitled The Great Good News, which is proving to be an excellent opportunity to remind each other that what we have to share is good news. And today we're exploring how that good news includes the greatest gift for the lonely. Our key Bible verse this morning, as we've just heard, are these lyrics. The audio, can you hear me? Shall I switch microphones? Try the red one. I'm on the red one now. I'm back. So our key Bible verses this morning are these lyrics. I think we'll have them back on the screen. They're lyrics from a song written thousands of years ago, better known to us as Psalm 68. Sing to God, sing in praise of his name. Rejoice before him. He is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing. Now, I really hope we'll discover that this is a little glimpse of God's greatest gift for the lonely. But for me, taking a first look at this topic, there are immediately some alarm bells ringing here. I'm nervous of the potential for any of this to sound at all shallow or oversimplistic or patronizing. If you're all by yourself, then you mustn't be sad. Jesus will take care of everything. A proper family will invite you for lunch sometimes, so everything's going to be fine. You can stop feeling lonely now, okay? Forgive my cynical tone. I know it's uncomfortable, but if that is even slightly the kind of thing that anyone has to say about loneliness, then please count me out. It makes me shudder. But my suspicion is that loneliness is far more serious, more complex, invisible, pervasive, and devastating than that. And that if we can be open to the picture language of the Bible and to the presence of God, then it could have a far more profound and nuanced and beautiful impact on our loneliness than we might first appreciate. And that the challenges and the resources that God places in our path as his family have far more depth and potential to be something that really is good news for the lonely. And by that I mean good news for us all. So loneliness, what is it? That might sound obvious, but what does it look like? What's it feel like? How do we recognize loneliness? And why is it such an important challenge that God himself would promise to get involved? Questions that could result in books and books worth of important research. Loneliness is complex, varied. We may all experience it in different ways. But in the few minutes we've got, I'm hoping that we can at least scratch the surface of this topic. Your experience will be different from mine. Your understanding of loneliness will be different from mine. But hopefully we can each grasp some sense of the importance of the issue. Loneliness has clearly been a huge challenge during lockdown. And it continues to be a significant extra struggle during this pingdemic, with times of enforced self-isolation as well. Is this microphone dying too? Sounds like I'm not doing a great deal. Can you hear me? I'll keep going. If you need me to switch mics, then shout. According to the Office of National Statistics, last winter, the proportion of adults in Great Britain that said they felt lonely often or always rose to 7.2% of the adult population. That's equivalent to roughly 3.7 million adults in Great Britain. And perhaps surprisingly, the figures showed that that proportion was higher in urban areas with a dense population than it was in rural areas where people live further apart. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. Many people choose to live alone and prefer life that way. And some people in a busy family or a bustling workplace can feel desperately lonely despite those around them, possibly without anyone else realizing it. Loneliness can impact our mental health, and struggling with our mental health can make us feel lonely. Moving to a new place, a relationship breakup, a bereavement, belonging to a minority group, feeling judged, being stigmatized, or worse still, bullied. All of these things and more can make us feel terribly alone. Matt Haig, you may have heard, brilliant author, has written several books, including one called Reasons to Stay Alive. He says this: there's nothing lonelier than being with people who aren't on your wavelength. The cure for loneliness isn't more people. The cure for loneliness is being understood. And that sounds about right to me. For me, knowing that I'm noticed is one of the best antidotes to loneliness. Knowing that I'm heard, valued, remembered, understood, appreciated, held. Knowing that there's one or two people who will delight in hearing how my day has been. Someone with whom I will relish sharing the story. So what does the Bible show us about loneliness? Our lyrics from the praise poetry of Psalm 68 suggest that our God is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, and that he sets the lonely in families, which sounds pretty promising, doesn't it? Sounds to me like a vision of how things could be. I'll say that again. It sounds to me like a vision of how things could be, perhaps of how things will be when God's kingdom comes on earth as it is in heaven. It's likely that this psalm was written as part of a big celebration in Jerusalem in King David's time, as God's people looked back on their extraordinary journey from slavery and isolation and imprisonment in Egypt to their miraculous escape, their miraculous being set free, their generation-long journey through the wilderness to their arrival in the promised land. It's a song that's a lavish act of worship, celebrating God's grace and his goodness, his presence and his protection throughout that perilous journey of uncertainty and danger. His constancy through times of getting it right and times of getting it very, very wrong. God was faithful and loving and unchanging to his people in their lostness and their aloneness and their undeservingness. And so they sing. Sing to God. Sing in praise of his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. Rejoice before him. And I love the way this picture of widows and orphans and the lonely being cared for and provided for, despite their helplessness, it's a picture that operates at both the micro level and the macro level. At the micro level, individuals being looked after and provided for by a loving community around them. And then at the macro level, it's the same picture of the nation of Abraham's descendants being looked after and provided for by their heavenly Father. And perhaps most encouragingly of all, we see the same picture language of the isolated and the vulnerable and the lonely being heard and valued and held in community, running right through the picture language of the story of the whole Bible. From God's sadness, as the first people he made and loved choose to walk away from him in the Garden of Eden. Right through the struggles of isolation and loneliness in the Old Testament, think of people like Joseph and Job and Elijah, and the whole nation as they're exiled to Babylon, away from their beloved homeland. Right through the struggles of the Old Testament, all the way to the arrival of God on earth as a tiny child. A child conceived by a single mum, in what was, for her at least, an unplanned pregnancy. With a stepfather, Joseph, persuaded by God to adopt his girlfriend's unexplained baby. The infant who grows up to become a travelling teacher, a wanderer, a sofa-surfing storyteller, a homeless healer, who paints pictures of banquets and feasts where the excluded and the untouchable are the guests of honour, who dines with the dirty, who embraces the undignified hospitality of broken perfume bottles and the tears of the lonely. If Jesus really was God on earth, the incarnation of God, God the person, then it seems we really do have a God who understands. And it seems that his understanding includes him actually experiencing and choosing to walk with us in our loneliness. He chose the isolation of weeks and weeks alone in the wilderness. He chose not to be married or to have children. He chose a bunch of friends who repeatedly misunderstand him or deny him or betray him. He chose to pray all night for his life, while his followers failed not just to pray with him, they failed even to stay awake. And then he chose the cross, possibly the most painful experience of loneliness of all time. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why? Why does God the person choose all of this? It's so that we can be his children. It's so that he can invite us, not just to pull up a chair and to sit and eat at his table. He doesn't just prepare a room for us in his Father's house. He chooses all of this isolation and pain and loneliness in order that we might be his brothers and his sisters. He doesn't just set the lonely in families. He stops at nothing in order that you and I and every one of us might be part of his family. Jesus fulfills all of those promises through Old Testament history. We are all God's chosen, adopted children. He welcomes us all into his family. And that is good news for the lonely, by which I mean good news for us all. So how can we respond to this good news? Firstly, I would suggest by not pretending everything is okay. The good news is incredible, but we still live in this extraordinary in-between time, the now and not yet of the kingdom of God. If you missed it, try and catch up with Murray's talk from this time last week, where he brilliantly explains the vital realization that following Jesus does not mean everything will be fine yet. We have a God who is with us and who loves us and who calls us to journey with him, to struggle on together towards that vision of his kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. But not everything is going to be okay yet. But what this picture of adoption into God's family does offer is a radical call to all of us, even those of us who are lonely, to notice each other, to value, to include each other, to listen to each other, to understand, to appreciate, to share the struggles of life, and then to enjoy the stories of the journey together. Together. See how many times the word together appears in our vision statements. What might that look like? I'm guessing that's something for each of us to pray about and to explore for ourselves, particularly as we consider who might be struggling with loneliness among our friends, our neighbours, our family. There's loads of ways in the life of St. Michael's and our wider community to work together, serve together, to build relationships, friendships, community. 3 quick suggestions from me. First up, hospitality. The whole business of looking out for each other as a family. Making sure that each of us is seen and heard and known. Living out the welcome to the table that Jesus models for us throughout his story. Now, rather than me waffle on about this, can I encourage you to find Vicky's talk from our evening celebration last week, which was all about hospitality. It was excellent. If you're watching this on catch-up, we'll try and put the link in the description below. Secondly, Kinsugi Hope. If you haven't come across Kinsugi Hope, please look it up. It's a Japanese word. It's about healing and beautiful restoration. I haven't got time to go into all the details now. Google it, Kinsugi Hope. It's a small group well-being course that enables us to share this journey together brilliantly. It's ideal for anyone facing challenges of isolation or loneliness or with their mental health. It's centered entirely around listening and friendship and trust. It's designed for people of all faiths and none. There's lots of churches in Bristol, including us here at St. Michael's, partnering with the Kinsugi Hope charity. And we're hoping to run our next course later this year. I recommend it. Thirdly, Befriend. I'm hoping that most of us have heard of Befriend. It's one of our superb mission partners here at St. Michael's, a fantastic organisation. They train volunteers, ordinary people from across Bristol with skills and advice, and then they partner those volunteers with refugees and asylum seekers who are living locally, having escaped life-threatening situations in their home countries. We've all found lockdown tough. But being forced to flee your home and relocate to a city where you don't speak the language and where you're prevented from earning a wage, can you imagine how much tougher that must be? Being a Befriend volunteer is a simple, incredible way of making a difference to someone at risk of crippling loneliness. There's lots more information on the website. But every volunteer I've heard from has said that building friendship with an isolated refugee has been a hugely enriching experience for them both. Because we are all God's chosen adopted children. He welcomes us all into his family, and that is good news for the lonely, by which I mean good news for us all. One final thought, turning once again to the celebration poetry of Psalm 68. When a psalm is written with the same words at the start and the end of the same song, it's like the framing, the foundation on which the whole piece of writing stands. So it's worth noticing that the end of Psalm 68 is so similar to the start of our passage this morning. Sing to God, you kingdoms of the earth. Sing praise to the Lord. To him who rides across the highest heavens, the ancient heavens, who thunders with a mighty voice. Proclaim the power of God, whose majesty is over Israel, whose power is in the heavens. You, God, are awesome in your sanctuary. The God of Israel gives power and strength to his people. Praise be to God. So as we look back on the journey together so far, like King David did in Jerusalem all those centuries ago, we can celebrate and sing our praise to God for his faithfulness, for his walking with us through the darkest of valleys, for his promise always to journey on with us no matter what lies ahead. Worshipping Jesus with singing and with our whole lives is one of the most vital ways in which we can build our friendship with him, praising him for this good news for the lonely, good news for us all. So let's stand and sing together.